The classroom was silent, except for the sound of laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made you smile, it was the kind that made your stomach twist into knots. The boy sat at the back of the room, his head down, trying to ignore the whispers. "He's the weakest in the class," someone said. "He can't even lift a pencil without dropping it," another added. The boy clenched his fists under the desk, his face burning with shame. He was used to the jokes, the stares, the pity. But today felt different. Today, something inside him stirred, a faint, almost imperceptible spark. The teacher announced a field trip to the nearby forest, and the class erupted in excitement. The boy didn't care much for nature, but anything was better than sitting in that classroom. As they wandered through the forest, the boy lagged behind, lost in thought. He stumbled over a tree root and fell to the ground. The laughter started again, but this time, he didn't care. Something had caught his eye, a faint glow coming from beneath a pile of leaves. He brushed the leaves aside and gasped. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small, metallic object. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, smooth and cold to the touch, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Without thinking, he picked it up. The moment his fingers touched the object, a surge of energy shot through his body. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt like he was floating. When he opened his eyes, the forest was silent. The other students were gone. The boy looked down at the object in his hand. It was glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't know what it was or where it came from, but one thing was clear: his life would never be the same. The boy stood in the middle of the forest, clutching the glowing artifact tightly in his hand. His heart raced as he looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest was eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He glanced down at the artifact again. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift and change, almost like they were alive. A strange warmth spread through his body, and he felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced. What is this thing?" he whispered to himself. Before he could think further, he heard voices in the distance. His classmates were calling his name, their voices growing louder as they approached. Panicking, he shoved the artifact into his pocket and tried to act normal. "There you are," one of his classmates said, running up to him. "We thought you got lost or something." The boy forced a smile. I just tripped. I'm fine." The rest of the field trip passed in a blur. The boy couldn't focus on anything except the weight of the artifact in his pocket. He kept expecting someone to notice, to ask questions, but no one did. When he got home that evening, he locked himself in his room and took out the artifact. It was still glowing faintly, and the symbols on its surface seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He turned it over in his hands, trying to understand what it was and why it had chosen him. That night, strange things started happening. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when he noticed a book on his desk begin to shake. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then the book slowly lifted off the desk and floated in midair. The boy sat up, his eyes wide with shock. "What the?" The book hovered for a moment before dropping back onto the desk with a loud thud. The boy's heart was pounding. He looked down at his hands, wondering if he had somehow caused it. Over the next few days, more strange occurrences followed. Objects around him would move on their own, and he began to hear faint whispers in his mind, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At school, things got even worse. During a science class, the teacher asked him to solve a problem on the board. As he stood there, chalk in hand, he felt a sudden surge of energy. The chalk slipped from his fingers, but instead of falling to the ground, it floated in midair. The entire class gasped. What just happened?" someone whispered. The boy quickly grabbed the chalk and pretended nothing had happened, but the whispers and stares followed him for the rest of the day. That evening, he decided to test his abilities. He sat in his room, focusing on a small toy car on his desk. He concentrated hard, imagining the car moving toward him. To his amazement, the car began to roll slowly across the desk. I can do this, he said, a mix of excitement and fear in his voice. But as he continued to experiment, he realized that his powers were growing stronger, and harder to control. One night, while trying to lift a heavier object, he accidentally shattered his bedroom window. The sound of breaking glass startled him, and he quickly hid the artifact under his bed, afraid of what might happen next. The next day at school, he noticed a man standing near the gates, watching him intently. The man was tall and wore a long coat, his face partially hidden by a hat. The boy felt a chill run down his spine. Who is that? He wondered. As the days went by, the man kept appearing, sometimes near the school, sometimes outside his house. The boy began to feel like he was being followed, and the whispers in his mind grew louder, more urgent. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, the man finally approached him. I know what you found, the man said, his voice low and calm. And I know what's happening to you. The boy froze, his heart racing. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smiled faintly. You don't have to be afraid. I'm here to help you. But you need to trust me. The boy hesitated. He didn't know whether to run or stay. The man seemed genuine, but there was something about him that felt off. What do you want? The boy asked cautiously. The artifact you found, the man said. It's not just a piece of metal. It's a key to something much bigger than you can imagine. And there are people who will do anything to get their hands on it. The boy's mind raced. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. The boy stood frozen, staring at the man in the long coat. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How did he know about the artifact? And most importantly, could he be trusted? The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the boy's. I know you're scared, he said softly. But you don't have to face this alone. There are things you need to understand, things that could save your life. The boy hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone else was nearby. The street was empty, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. He tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack, where the artifact was hidden. Who are you? The boy asked, his voice trembling. My name isn't important, the man replied. What's important is that you listen to me. The artifact you found, it's not just a random object. It's part of something much larger, something that could change the course of history. The boy's curiosity got the better of him. What do you mean? What is it? The man glanced around, as if making sure no one was watching. Not here, he said. It's not safe to talk in the open. Follow me. The boy hesitated again. Every instinct told him to run, but something about the man's calm demeanor made him pause. He took a deep breath and nodded. The man led him to a small, dimly lit cafe a few blocks away. They sat in a corner booth, away from the other customers. The boy kept his backpack close, his hand resting on the artifact inside. Tell me everything, the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned forward, his expression serious. The artifact you found is part of an ancient alien technology. It was designed to awaken latent abilities in humans, abilities that have been dormant for centuries. You're not the only one who's found one of these artifacts. There are others like you, scattered across the world. The boy's eyes widened. Others? You mean, there are more people with powers? The man nodded. Yes. But not everyone who finds an artifact is worthy. Some can't handle the power. It consumes them, drives them mad. That's why I'm here, to guide you, to help you understand what's happening to you. The boy's mind was spinning. He thought about the strange things that had been happening, the floating objects, the whispers in his mind. It all made sense now, but it was also terrifying. "Why me?" the boy asked. "Why did the artifact choose me?" The man smiled faintly. "It didn't choose you randomly. There's something special about you, something the artifact recognized. You have the potential to do great things, but only if you learn to control your powers." The boy looked down at his hands, still unsure. "I don't know if I can. It's too much." "You can," the man said firmly. "But you need to trust me. There are people out there who want the artifact for their own purposes. They'll stop at nothing to get it, and they won't care who gets hurt in the process." The boy's stomach churned. "What kind of people?" "Powerful people," the man replied. "Governments, corporations, even secret organizations. They've been searching for these artifacts for years, and now that one has been activated, they'll come for you." The boy felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. "What should I do?" The man leaned back, his expression softening. "For now, stay hidden. Don't use your powers unless absolutely necessary. And whatever you do, don't let anyone else know about the artifact." The boy nodded slowly, his mind racing. He didn't know if he could trust this man, but he didn't have many options. As they left the cafe, the man handed him a small, folded piece of paper. "If you need me, call this number. But be careful, trust no one." The boy took the paper and tucked it into his pocket. He watched as the man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. That night, the boy lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He thought about the artifact, the man's warnings, and the powers he still didn't fully understand. He reached under his bed and pulled out the artifact. It glowed faintly in the darkness, the symbols on its surface pulsing with a soft light. He held it in his hands, feeling the warmth spread through his body. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered to himself. As if in response, the whispers in his mind grew louder, more urgent. He closed his eyes, trying to make sense of them, but they were too fragmented, too chaotic. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside his window. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he got out of bed and crept to the window, peering through the curtains. There, standing in the shadows, was another figure, a woman, dressed in black, her eyes fixed on his window. The boy's breath caught in his throat. He quickly ducked down, his mind racing. Who was she? Was she one of the people the man had warned him about? He didn't have time to think. The woman began to move toward the house, her movements swift and deliberate. The boy knew he had to act fast. He grabbed the artifact and stuffed it into his backpack, his hands trembling. He didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear: he couldn't stay here. He slipped out of his room and down the stairs, careful not to make a sound. As he reached the front door, he heard a faint click from the back of the house. They were inside. The boy's heart pounded as he stood by the front door, his hand gripping the doorknob. He could hear faint footsteps moving through the house, getting closer with every second. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. He glanced back toward the stairs, where the sound was coming from. The woman in black was inside, and he had no doubt she was after the artifact. He couldn't let her find it, or him. With a deep breath, he turned the doorknob and slipped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He didn't know where to go, but he knew he had to get as far away from the house as possible. He started running, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The artifact felt heavy inside, as if it was weighing him down. He didn't stop to look back, afraid of what he might see. As he turned the corner, he heard a voice behind him. "Stop!" The boy's blood ran cold. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the woman in black chasing after him, her movements fast and precise. She was gaining on him. Panic surged through him, and he pushed himself to run faster. His legs burned, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. He didn't know how long he could keep this up. Up ahead, he saw an alleyway. Without thinking, he darted into it, hoping to lose the woman in the maze of narrow streets. The alley was dark and cluttered with trash cans, but he didn't care. He just needed to get away. He turned another corner and pressed himself against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure the woman could hear it. He listened carefully, but the only sound was the distant hum of the city. For a moment, he thought he was safe. Then he heard footsteps. The boy's stomach dropped. He peeked around the corner and saw the woman standing at the entrance of the alley, her eyes scanning the darkness. She hadn't seen him yet, but it was only a matter of time. He looked around, desperate for a way out. The alley was a dead end, with no exits except the way he had come. He was trapped. The boy's mind raced. He couldn't let her catch him. He had to do something, anything. He closed his eyes and focused on the artifact in his backpack. He could feel its warmth, its energy. It was like a living thing, pulsing with power. "Help me," he whispered. Suddenly, he felt a surge of energy course through his body. His eyes snapped open, and he saw the trash cans in front of him begin to shake. Without thinking, he raised his hand, and the trash cans lifted into the air, hovering for a moment before flying toward the woman. She dodged them easily, but the distraction gave the boy the chance he needed. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the pavement. The woman shouted something, but he didn't stop. He didn't look back. He just kept running, his mind focused on one thing, survival. He didn't know how long he ran, but eventually, he found himself in a part of the city he didn't recognize. The streets were empty, and the buildings were dark and silent. He slowed down, his legs trembling with exhaustion. He leaned against a wall, trying to catch his breath. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who was that woman? Why was she after him? And what was he supposed to do now? The boy reached into his backpack and pulled out the artifact. It glowed faintly in the darkness, the symbols on its surface shifting and changing. He stared at it, feeling a mix of awe and fear. "What are you?" he whispered. As if in response, the whispers in his mind grew louder, more urgent. He closed his eyes, trying to make sense of them, but they were still too fragmented, too chaotic. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. "You're not safe here." The boy spun around, his heart racing. Standing a few feet away was the man from the cafe, the one who had warned him about the artifact. "You," the boy said, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" The man stepped closer, his expression serious. "I told you they would come for you. You need to come with me, now." The boy hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust this man, but he didn't have many options. The woman in black was still out there, and he couldn't face her alone. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," the man replied. "But we need to move quickly. They're already tracking you." The boy nodded, his mind made up. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew he couldn't stay here. The man led him through the dark streets, moving quickly and quietly. The boy followed, his heart still pounding. He didn't know where they were going, but he hoped it was somewhere he could finally catch his breath. As they turned a corner, the man suddenly stopped. He held up a hand, signaling for the boy to stay quiet. "What is it?" the boy whispered. The man didn't answer. He was staring at something in the distance, his expression tense. The boy followed his gaze and saw a group of figures standing at the end of the street. They were dressed in black, just like the woman, and they were blocking the way. The boy's stomach dropped. What do we do? The man glanced at him, his eyes serious. Stay close to me. And whatever happens, don't let go of the artifact. Before the boy could respond, the figures began to move toward them. The man stepped forward, his hands glowing with a faint light. The boy watched in awe as the man raised his hands, and a wave of energy surged through the air, knocking the figures off their feet. Run, the man shouted. The boy didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, his heart pounding as he followed the man through the dark streets. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear: the hunt had begun. The boy ran as fast as he could, his legs burning with exhaustion. The man led him through a maze of narrow streets and alleys, always staying one step ahead of the figures in black. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced with fear and confusion. Finally, they reached an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. The man pushed open a rusted door and gestured for the boy to follow him inside. The warehouse was dark and filled with shadows, but the boy could see faint lights in the distance. As they walked further inside, he realized the lights were coming from a group of people gathered in the center of the room. There were about a dozen of them, men and women of different ages, all with the same serious expression on their faces. They turned as the boy and the man approached, their eyes narrowing with curiosity. "This is him," the man said, gesturing to the boy. "The one I told you about." The group exchanged glances, and one of them, a tall woman with short hair, stepped forward. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice sharp. The man nodded. "He has the artifact. And he's already starting to show signs of its power." The woman studied the boy for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll take him in. But he needs to understand the risks." The boy looked around, feeling more confused than ever. What is this place? Who are you people?" The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "These are people like you, people who have found artifacts and awakened their powers. They're here to help you, to teach you how to control your abilities." The boy's eyes widened. "You mean, they have powers too?" The woman nodded. "We do. And we've been fighting to protect the artifacts from those who would misuse them. You're not alone anymore." The boy felt a mix of relief and fear. He didn't know if he could trust these people, but he didn't have many options. "What do I need to do?" he asked. The woman smiled faintly. "For now, just listen and learn. We'll teach you everything you need to know." Over the next few days, the boy began to train with the group. They taught him how to focus his energy, how to control his powers, and how to defend himself. It wasn't easy, his abilities were still unpredictable, and he often struggled to keep up, but he was determined to learn. One of the group members, a young man with a kind smile, took a special interest in the boy. His name was Alex, and he had been with the group for several years. "It's tough at first," Alex said as they practiced lifting objects with their minds. "But you'll get the hang of it. Just don't give up." The boy nodded, focusing on the small rock in front of him. He raised his hand, and the rock began to shake. Slowly, it lifted off the ground, hovering in mid-air for a moment before dropping back down. "I did it," the boy said, a smile spreading across his face. Alex grinned. "See? You're getting better already." As the days went by, the boy began to feel more confident. He still didn't fully understand his powers, but he was starting to believe he could control them. But not everyone in the group was so welcoming. One evening, as the boy was practicing with Alex, he noticed a man watching him from across the room. The man was tall and muscular, with a scar running down the side of his face. His eyes were cold and calculating, and they never seemed to leave the boy. "Who's that?" the boy whispered to Alex. Alex glanced over and frowned. "That's Marcus. He's not exactly a fan of newcomers." The boy felt a chill run down his spine. "Why not?" Alex hesitated. Let's just say he doesn't trust easily. And he's not afraid to show it. The boy didn't ask any more questions, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He tried to avoid Marcus as much as possible, but it wasn't easy. The man seemed to be everywhere. One night, as the boy was getting ready for bed, he heard voices outside his room. He crept to the door and pressed his ear against it, listening carefully. "I don't like this," Marcus said, his voice low and angry. "We're putting too much trust in him. He's just a kid, he doesn't know what he's doing." "He's learning," another voice replied. It was the woman with short hair. "And we need all the help we can get. Or he could get us all killed," Marcus snapped. "We can't afford to take chances." The boy's heart sank. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to prove himself, to show them he could be trusted, but he didn't know how. The next day, the group gathered for a meeting. The woman with short hair, her name was Sarah, stood at the front of the room, her expression serious. "We've received word that the enemy is closing in," she said. "They know about the boy, and they're coming for him. We need to be ready." The room fell silent, and the boy felt a wave of fear wash over him. He didn't know if he was ready for this, if he could face the people who were after him. But he didn't have a choice. As the group began to discuss their plans, the boy noticed Marcus staring at him again. His eyes were cold and unreadable, and the boy couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. He didn't have to wait long to find out. After the meeting, Marcus approached him, his expression grim. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice low. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you need to understand something. This isn't a game. If you mess up, people die. Got it?" The boy nodded, his throat dry. I understand." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Don't make me regret this." As Marcus walked away, the boy felt a mix of fear and determination. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let these people down. The tension in the warehouse was palpable. The group was preparing for what they believed would be their biggest challenge yet, a direct confrontation with the enemy. The boy could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He wanted to prove himself, to show them he could be trusted, but the doubt in Marcus's eyes lingered in his mind. Over the next few days, the group trained harder than ever. The boy practiced controlling his powers, lifting heavier objects and even creating small energy bursts. Alex was always by his side, encouraging him and offering advice. "You're getting stronger," Alex said one evening as they practiced. "But remember, it's not just about power. It's about control." The boy nodded, focusing on the metal rod in front of him. He raised his hand, and the rod lifted into the air, spinning slowly. He held it there for a few seconds before gently lowering it back to the ground. "Good," Alex said, smiling. "You're getting the hang of it." But not everyone was so supportive. Marcus continued to watch the boy with a cold, calculating gaze. He rarely spoke to him, but when he did, his words were sharp and cutting. "Don't think you're one of us just yet," Marcus said one day as the boy walked past him. "You've still got a long way to go." The boy didn't respond, but the words stung. He wanted to prove Marcus wrong, to show him he was capable, but he didn't know how. One night, as the group gathered for a final briefing before the mission, Sarah stood at the front of the room, her expression serious. "We've located one of their bases," she said, pointing to a map on the wall. "It's heavily guarded, but if we can infiltrate it, we might be able to retrieve some of the artifacts they've stolen." The boy's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been training for. He glanced around the room, seeing the determination on everyone's faces. Even Marcus looked focused, his usual scowl replaced by a look of intense concentration. "We'll move in at dawn," Sarah continued. "Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this together." The group nodded, and the boy felt a surge of adrenaline. He was ready, or at least, he thought he was. The next morning, they set out before sunrise. The base was located in a remote area, surrounded by dense forest. The group moved silently through the trees, their movements precise and coordinated. As they approached the base, the boy's heart pounded in his chest. He could see the guards patrolling the perimeter, their weapons glinting in the early morning light. "Remember," Sarah whispered as they crouched behind a cluster of trees. "Stick to the plan. We'll create a distraction, and then move in." The boy nodded, his hands trembling. He glanced at Alex, who gave him a reassuring smile. "You'll be fine," Alex whispered. "Just stay close to me." The plan went smoothly at first. Sarah and a few others created a diversion, drawing the guards away from the main entrance. The rest of the group moved in quickly, slipping inside the base before the guards could react. The boy followed Alex through the dark corridors, his heart racing. The base was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of machinery. "Where are the artifacts?" the boy whispered. "They'll be in the central chamber," Alex replied. "But we need to be careful. There could be traps." As they moved deeper into the base, the boy began to feel a strange sensation, a pull, like something was calling to him. He didn't know what it was, but it was coming from the direction of the central chamber. "Do you feel that?" he asked Alex. Alex frowned. "Feel what?" The boy hesitated. "I don't know, it's like something's pulling me." Alex studied him for a moment, then nodded. "It could be the artifacts. They're drawn to each other. Just stay focused." The boy nodded, trying to ignore the strange sensation. But as they approached the central chamber, it grew stronger, almost overwhelming. When they finally reached the chamber, the boy's breath caught in his throat. The room was filled with artifacts, dozens of them, all glowing faintly. The energy in the room was intense, and the boy could feel it coursing through his body. "This is it," Alex said, his voice filled with awe. "We need to grab as many as we can and get out of here." The group moved quickly, gathering the artifacts and stuffing them into their bags. The boy reached for one, but as his fingers touched it, he felt a sudden surge of energy. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more urgent. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice tense. "Now." The group turned to leave, but as they reached the door, they were met with a group of armed guards. The guards raised their weapons, and the room erupted into chaos. The boy froze, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do. He could feel the energy building inside him, but he didn't know how to control it. "Use your powers," Alex shouted, dodging a blast from one of the guards. The boy closed his eyes, focusing on the energy inside him. He raised his hand, and a wave of energy surged through the room, knocking the guards off their feet. "Nice one," Alex said, grinning. But before the boy could respond, he heard a voice behind him. Well, looks like we've got a traitor in our midst." The boy turned and saw Marcus standing in the doorway, a smirk on his face. "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes cold. "I'm talking about him," he said, pointing at the boy. "He led them right to us." The boy's heart sank. "What? No. I didn't." But before he could finish, the room was filled with more guards, their weapons trained on the group. "You should have listened to me," Marcus said, his voice filled with disdain. "Now you'll all pay the price." The boy stared at him in shock, his mind reeling. Marcus had betrayed them, and now they were all in danger. The room was filled with tension as the guards surrounded the group, their weapons aimed and ready. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. Marcus, the man who had always doubted him, had betrayed them all. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice cold and sharp. "What have you done?" Marcus smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. What I had to do? You were too blind to see the truth. This kid was always a liability. Now, thanks to him, we're all going to pay the price. The boy felt a surge of anger and guilt. I didn't do this, he shouted. You set us up. Marcus ignored him, turning to the guards. Take them. And make sure you get the artifacts. The guards moved forward, their weapons trained on the group. The boy glanced at Alex, who gave him a determined look. We're not going down without a fight, Alex said, his voice steady. Sarah nodded, her expression fierce. Everyone, stay close. We'll fight our way out. The boy took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He could feel the energy of the artifacts pulsing in the room, and he knew he had to use it. He closed his eyes, focusing on the power inside him. As the guards closed in, the boy raised his hands, and a wave of energy surged through the room. The guards were thrown back, their weapons clattering to the ground. Now! Sarah shouted. The group sprang into action, using their powers to fight off the guards. Alex created a barrier of energy, shielding them from incoming attacks, while Sarah used her telekinesis to disarm the guards. The boy focused on the artifacts, feeling their energy grow stronger with every passing second. He could feel the whispers in his mind growing louder, more urgent, guiding him. We need to get out of here. Alex shouted, deflecting a blast from one of the guards. The boy nodded, grabbing as many artifacts as he could carry. This way, he said, leading the group toward a side door. They ran through the dark corridors, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. The boy could feel the energy of the artifacts pulsing in his hands, and he knew they were running out of time. As they reached the exit, they were met with another group of guards. The boy's heart sank, but he didn't stop. He raised his hands, and a burst of energy shot forward, knocking the guards off their feet. Keep going. Sarah shouted. They burst out of the base and into the early morning light. The forest was just ahead, and the boy knew they could lose their pursuers in the trees. But as they ran, the boy heard a voice behind him. You're not getting away that easily. He turned and saw Marcus standing at the entrance of the base, a smug expression on his face. You think you can just walk away? Marcus said, his voice filled with disdain. You're all fools. The boy felt a surge of anger. Why are you doing this? He shouted. Marcus smirked. Because I know the truth, this power isn't meant for us. It's meant for those who are strong enough to wield it. And that's not you. Before the boy could respond, Marcus raised his hand, and a blast of energy shot toward them. The boy reacted instinctively, creating a shield of energy to block the attack. The force of the blast knocked him back, but he managed to stay on his feet. He could feel the energy of the artifacts growing stronger, and he knew he had to use it. We need to stop him, Sarah said, her voice tense. The boy nodded, his mind focused. He could feel the whispers in his mind guiding him, telling him what to do. Stay back, he said, stepping forward. I'll handle this. The group hesitated, but they didn't argue. The boy took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on Marcus. Marcus laughed. You really think you can beat me? You're just a kid. The boy didn't respond. He raised his hands, and a surge of energy shot toward Marcus. The blast hit him square in the chest, knocking him off his feet. Marcus groaned, struggling to get up. You'll regret this, he said, his voice filled with anger. The boy didn't give him a chance to recover. He focused all his energy on the artifacts, feeling their power surge through him. He raised his hands, and a massive wave of energy shot forward, engulfing Marcus and the base behind him. The explosion was deafening, and the boy was thrown back by the force of the blast. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw the base in ruins, the flames rising into the sky. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. The boy struggled to his feet, his body aching. The group rushed to his side, their expressions filled with relief. "You did it," Alex said, helping him up. The boy nodded, but he didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "More will come." The boy nodded, and the group quickly made their way into the forest. As they ran, the boy couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had stopped Marcus, but he knew this wasn't over. When they finally reached a safe distance, the group stopped to catch their breath. The boy sat down on a fallen tree, his hands trembling. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now, we regroup. And we prepare for what's coming." The boy nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The group sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them. The boy stared at the ground, his mind racing. He had stopped Marcus and destroyed the enemy base, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Sarah broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "We need to figure out our next move. They'll be coming for us now more than ever." Alex nodded, his expression serious. "We can't stay here for long. They'll track us down." The boy looked up, his hands still trembling. "What do we do? We can't keep running forever." Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "There's something you need to know, something we've been keeping from you." The boy's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Alex, then turned back to the boy. "The artifacts, they're not just tools of power. They're part of something much bigger, a plan set in motion thousands of years ago." The boy frowned, confused. "What kind of plan?" Sarah took a deep breath. "The artifacts were created by an ancient alien race. They knew that one day, humanity would face a threat unlike anything we've ever seen. The artifacts were designed to awaken the potential within us, to prepare us for what's coming." The boy's eyes widened. "What kind of threat?" Sarah's expression darkened. "We don't know the details, but we know it's coming. And when it does, we'll need every ounce of power we can get to stop it." The boy felt a chill run down his spine. He had always thought the artifacts were just tools of power, but now he realized they were so much more. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, his voice filled with frustration. "We didn't want to overwhelm you," Alex said gently. "You've been through enough already." The boy nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had always thought he was fighting to protect himself and the people he cared about, but now he realized the stakes were much higher. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We keep fighting. We find the other artifacts and prepare for what's coming. And we make sure we're ready when the time comes." The boy nodded, but he still felt overwhelmed. He didn't know if he was ready for this, if he could handle the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. As the group prepared to move out, the boy noticed something strange. The artifacts he had been carrying were glowing brighter than ever, and he could feel their energy pulsing through him. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Sarah and Alex exchanged a glance, then nodded. "The artifacts are reacting to you," Sarah said. "They know you're the key to all of this." The boy frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "There's something else you need to know. The artifacts, they've chosen you. You're not just a wielder of their power, you're their guardian. And when the time comes, you'll be the one to lead us." The boy's heart skipped a beat. "Me? But I'm just a kid. I don't know how to lead anyone." Sarah smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. We'll be with you every step of the way." The boy nodded, but he still felt overwhelmed. He didn't know if he was ready for this, if he could handle the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. As the group moved through the forest, the boy couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had always thought he was fighting to protect himself and the people he cared about, but now he realized the stakes were much higher. When they finally reached a safe location, an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, the group settled in for the night. The boy sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his mind racing. Alex sat down beside him, his expression serious. "You okay?" The boy nodded, but he didn't look up. I don't know if I can do this." Alex placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. We're all in this together." The boy nodded, but he still felt overwhelmed. He didn't know if he was ready for this, if he could handle the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. As the night wore on, the boy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Sarah had said, about the ancient alien race and the threat that was coming. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was something big, something that would change everything. Finally, he got up and walked outside, needing some fresh air. The night was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. As he stood there, staring up at the stars, he felt a strange sensation, a pull, like something was calling to him. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling, and the whispers in his mind grew louder. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered. As if in response, the artifacts in his bag began to glow, their light piercing through the darkness. The boy reached into the bag and pulled one out, holding it in his hands. The artifact pulsed with energy, and the boy felt a surge of power course through him. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy, and suddenly, he saw something, a vision, clear and vivid. He saw a massive ship, unlike anything he had ever seen, descending from the sky. He saw cities in ruins, people running in fear. And he saw himself, standing at the center of it all, the artifacts glowing in his hands. The vision faded, and the boy opened his eyes, his heart pounding. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing: he couldn't ignore it. He walked back inside, his mind made up. He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he had to try. The boy sat by the fire, the vision still fresh in his mind. The images of destruction, the massive ship, and the fear on people's faces haunted him. He knew now that the threat Sarah had spoken of was real, and it was coming sooner than anyone had anticipated. The group gathered around him, their faces filled with concern. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice calm but urgent. "What did you see?" she asked. The boy took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I saw a ship. A huge one. It was coming down from the sky, and everything was falling apart. People were running, screaming, and I was there, holding the artifacts." Sarah's expression darkened. "It's happening. The threat we've been preparing for, it's here." Alex clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "Then we don't have any more time to waste. We need to get ready." The boy nodded, but he still felt a knot of fear in his stomach. "What do we do? How do we stop something like that?" Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We stick to the plan. We find the remaining artifacts, unite the others who have awakened their powers, and prepare for the fight. And you," she paused, her eyes locking onto his. "You're the key to all of this. The artifacts have chosen you for a reason." The boy swallowed hard. He didn't feel like a key or a leader. He felt like a scared kid who had been thrust into a world he didn't understand. But he knew he couldn't back down now. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to prepare. They tracked down the remaining artifacts, each one adding to the boy's growing power. They also reached out to others who had awakened their abilities, forming a small but determined alliance. The boy trained harder than ever, pushing himself to the limit. He practiced controlling his powers, focusing his energy, and working with the others to create strategies for the battle ahead. But even as he grew stronger, the fear never left him. He couldn't stop thinking about the vision, the ship, the destruction, the people running in terror. He knew he had to be ready, but he didn't know if he ever would be. One evening, as the group gathered around the fire, Sarah turned to the boy. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with pride. "But there's one more thing you need to understand." The boy frowned. "What is it?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "The artifacts, they're not just tools of power. They're alive, in a way. They have a consciousness, a will of their own. And they've chosen you because they believe in you." The boy's eyes widened. "They believe in me?" Sarah nodded. "You're not just a wielder of their power. You're their guardian. And when the time comes, you'll need to trust them, and yourself." The boy nodded, but he still felt a knot of fear in his stomach. He didn't know if he could live up to their expectations, but he knew he had to try. The day finally came. The group stood on a hill overlooking the city, the artifacts glowing brightly in their hands. The sky was clear, but the air was thick with tension. "They're coming," Alex said, his voice tense. The boy looked up and saw it, a massive ship, just like in his vision, descending from the sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. The city below erupted into chaos. People ran through the streets, screaming in terror as the ship hovered above them. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked at the others, their faces filled with determination. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We stick to the plan. And no matter what happens, we don't give up." The boy nodded, his hands tightening around the artifacts. He could feel their energy pulsing through him, guiding him. As the ship descended, the group moved into position. The boy stood at the center, the artifacts glowing brightly in his hands. He closed his eyes, focusing on their energy, and felt a surge of power course through him. The ship's doors opened, and a swarm of alien creatures poured out, their eyes glowing with a cold, mechanical light. The boy took a deep breath, then raised his hands. A wave of energy shot forward, knocking the creatures off their feet. The battle had begun. The group fought with everything they had, their powers combining to create a force unlike anything the world had ever seen. The boy stood at the center of it all, the artifacts guiding him, their energy flowing through him like a river. But even as they fought, the boy knew it wasn't enough. The creatures kept coming, their numbers endless. "We need to take out the ship," Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The boy nodded, his mind focused. He could feel the artifact's energy growing stronger, and he knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes, focusing all his energy on the ship. The artifacts glowed brighter than ever, their light piercing through the darkness. With a final surge of power, the boy raised his hands, and a massive beam of energy shot toward the ship. The explosion was deafening, the force of the blast knocking the boy off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw the ship falling from the sky, its surface crumbling as it crashed to the ground. The creatures stopped moving, their glowing eyes fading to black. The boy struggled to his feet, his body aching. The city was in ruins, but the threat was gone. The group gathered around him, their faces filled with relief. "You did it," Alex said, his voice filled with awe. The boy nodded, but he didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As the sun rose over the city, the boy looked out at the destruction. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew they had taken the first step toward a new beginning.